Namaste and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology Debunking Mythology. Sattology means science of truth or study of truth. Opposite to that is mythology, which means science or study of fake lie or imagination. Today in my studio, we have some guests here sitting and watching me doing live with all of you. And finally, we have a studio ready in San Diego. So people will invite more Americans to come and talk to us about a combined holistic culture. Now, I have a very, very special guest today, and she has written a book, A Hindu in Oxford, and you must check out her book and then see what you learn from that. But today we'll go deep into that book and also her experiences. We have been living in the West, so we know how Americans think, how different cultures in Americans think, and how State Department thinks. They're two different entities completely. So without delay, let us welcome Rashmi Samant. Welcome, Rashmi.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Namaste.
Namaste. So the topic is very intriguing, understanding British mindset, and you were opposed in the campus that you were a Hindu chaplain, and all those things. But if you look at the US history of chaplains, Hinduism or Hindu culture, Sanatan Dharma culture is not even part of it. Sanatan Dharma अमेरिका के chaplains में party नहीं है. It is not there. So just explain me how is the mindset which you saw of the British.
Well, Aditi, I think it's very interesting and it's not very apparent. On the surface, it is very hidden. You wouldn't imagine that a bias exists. So for me, the first couple of days on campus was just extremely wonderful. It was beautiful. I had a lot of fun. I was part of every group you can imagine, and I was living the ultimate, we are tolerant, we are diverse, and the ultimate slogan life that the Western sort of institutions go by to say that they're very inclusive and that they're very inviting of everybody. But I think that no, I don't think I've come to realize over time. What I've come to realize over time is that it is just part of the facade uh, to keep up formalities, because in this particular era you cannot be crass about your bias or discrimination. You can't be straightforward about it. You'll be called out. So there are subtle ways in which the status quo is maintained without it being black and white or in words. I'll just give you a very simple example. They were very happy with me as long as I was a student, as long as I was contributing to their diversity index, as long as I was just another person of color on campus that they could display on the website. But the minute I became president of the student union and I was in an actual position of power where I could call the shots and tell them what needs to be done and shouldn't be done, that's when they had an active problem with it. I think today we see the same with Bharat as well. And we can extrapolate this from the sort of British mentality to the mentality of the Western world all over, that they had a great time with Bharat as long as we were a poor nation, still a developing nation, still very poor, and in deplorable conditions. But the minute we've become economically stable and the minute we've taken charge of our own future and that of many countries, including few in Africa and world over, that's when they have a problem with us, and we've started dropping in the world over happiness indexes, in the world over democracy indexes, in the world over hunger indexes. In fact, we rank lower than Pakistan, where there are kilometers of lines for rotis. So this is the sort of mentality that I noticed when whilst I was in Britain, that they were happy to sort of establish their magnanimity over the suffering of others, as long as the others knew their place and would behave best according to their rules. But the minute they took charge of their own fates and destiny, that's when this sort of point of diversity became a thorn on the side.
Yeah, very common, very good point you mentioned. Like, if I if I am superior to you, you are very. I think you're very nice. But the moment you start becoming my equal, that means you are competing with me. Is it? Did I summarize it?
Yeah, you've summarized it beautifully, Aditya ji.
You know, like, I'll keep sharing on screen for the audience also. And there are approximately, if you see, the colonies, there are around 14, actually 19 colonies, including USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand of Britain. And the legality of all these colonies can be questioned, but nobody has questioned it. And like, so why do you think the do you think the British colonization ever ended?
Well, Aditya ji, I don't just believe, I know so that the British colonization never ended, and that it just, transformed into another form, where they could just tout to be politically correct but go on with the sort of dominance. So basically, why did colonization happen? It had happened to loot somebody of their resources, to make sure that they could live a comfortable life off of the back of our hard work. After colonizing us for centuries, for over 2 3 centuries, nothing was left to loot here anymore. I mean, they took over 45 trillion worth of wealth from here. So there was no use for them to be physically here. And it was, every century has its own sense of political correctness. So it was very politically incorrect around 1947 for them still to have large colonies. So they just left, but they left us with a broken education system. They left us with a population that was not sure in itself, that was a sepoy, which thought everything Western was superior. So we continued to slave to our former British colonizers, and that, I think, the colonizers sort of conflated in meaning as well. I mean, I think all of the Western powers sort of then got into that definition. So after the British like physically left us, it was just not the British that we were serving, it was a larger sort of Western alliance that we were serving, their interests that we were serving, because of our own sort of mental incapacity to get out of the slavery we were left in. And even now, the world over, the system is rigged in a way that the West always makes a pound, and we're always working the hardest, making the lowest. If you look at economy as a pyramid, and they're working the least and making the most, that's how it is. It's funny because when I was in Bharat, I was studying here, I did my undergraduate degree here. The most sought after job was to actually become a consultant with Goldman Sachs. And it was like a very sought after thing that people used to do back in the day. And I thought it was a random sort of consultancy. And it was only after I went to England that I realized that it's actually a bank, and that the banking only happens in England, and that what happens here in Bharat is that there's just this back end processing that happens, and people are still doing like a BPO equivalent job. And it's crazy that we continue to do these things. The people here in India at Goldman Sachs, they work the longest hours, make the least amount of money in the sort of grand scheme of pyramid as it stands. But those sitting there in England, they do the best job and they make the most money. So the world is still rigged in that sense, and global market spaces, global market forces, they're all poised in a way that colonization actually continued, and that it never stopped. So I feel like all you need to do is look at the global market forces, and you will realize that colonization didn't just end. In fact, instead of one master, we have multiple masters now, which form the sort of global Western market forces, which continue to dominate and call the shots and rig the system from time to time. And it's something we're trying really hard to shake. But I think, it's a combination of like sepoys and a number of people who want to see us fail.
You hit the nail. Actually, you hit the nail. You're speaking my book, Gold Rain God. Now, one of the things which I really like what you said with so much clarity, but I want to drill down into it.
Hmm.
Now, you mentioned that post 1945 architecture. And I have
Yeah.
been telling this that they are hiding their colonies, they're hiding their sources of income, and they create conflicts in some other areas so that the world focuses on those areas and they continue to loot. Very classical example is, and I will say French also included, British also included, Spaniards also included, Portugal also included, four major countries who are colonizing the world. Now, New Caledonia, nobody knows. I think today, before my show today, nobody knew where the New Caledonia is. New Caledonia is between Fiji and New Zealand, small island. 25% of world's nickel resources, 25% from that small island. And the riots broke out because the local Kanak people, they were known as Kanak. Kanak is the, uh, like Hawaii is known as Sudarshan Dweep in our Purana. And Kanak people want their voting rights because what they did was, whichever French citizen migrated over there in last 10 years, they'll be allowed to vote. So democracy is used to control and destroy the native populations. Very classical strategy they tried with India with the brown sepoy you just mentioned right now.
Yeah.
So and they legalized colonization with United Nations human resources, human rights, whatever they call it, and they have no regard for human rights. So please elaborate on this more. That when they call people to UK, do they call them to educate them or to indoctrinate them?
Well, Aditya, if I can add to like what you said, I think also when they left us all, they left us in a state of perpetual conflict as well. So that we would be stuck in this ever sort of growing sort of sense of you know problem. They just did not split Bharat to India and Pakistan. They did it everywhere, world over. Every colony the British or the Western powers left, they left them all in like sort of a perpetual state of conflict, so that they just never recover from either colonization or the sort of conflicts that they have to now face on a day-to-day basis. So I think that is key. And the second thing, of course, you're right to say that they have institutionalized colonization. It's actually funny how we look up to institutions like the United Nations, the United Nations Human Rights Council, when there are large conflicts across the world, as to thinking that they will empower us, that they will empower the world, and they will show direction when there is none in the world. But unfortunately, they're the very people who are causing these issues in the first place, and enabling institutions, enabling former colonial powers to say to make money off of it. You actually hit the nail on the head when you said this. And the sort of perpetual conflict not only gives them relevance on a daily basis, but also enables them to be in a negotiatory position where they can also flip in two or three things that maintain the global market forces. So I think it's very sinister in the way that they've sort of formulated all of these policies. They have formulated all of these organizations uh, to sort of mask the sense of righteousness, to mask the sense of justice from a common person, but at the same time cripple the rights of the common person in the grand scheme of things. And I think it's rather unfortunate that it's only now that we are beginning to realize the magnitude of what's going on. Very often I feel, Aditya, that we find out about things long after the era of that particular sort of system of oppression is over.
No
It's only
longer
now
now.
that
No longer. We are way ahead now. No longer.
I think it's debatable, Aditya ji. I feel like, okay, we realized sort of what colonization did to us in the 2000s, and what the UN did to us,
Rashmi,
what
I
the
was
UN
saying from the Sattology perspective, we have been highlighting in 10 years in advance now what they're going to do.
So congratulations to you on that, and I guess this is really important work, and how social media has actually aided in, sort of enabling this sort of a interesting conversation. It's in the small things. It's as small as climate change. They brought in the whole concept of climate change. They brought in the Paris Agreement, they brought in the Kyoto Agreement before that. And then it's interesting how the many institutions which were formed as a result to sort of implement these protocols were private institutions formed by former United Nations employees. And they staked to make a lot of money from the kind of policies which were being made. Carbon crediting is another thing which people might have heard about it. I'm an energy systems engineer myself. And it's another very smart way of sort of doing and going about this sort of colonization, as to speak. uh, if I'm being completely honest, I feel like carbon crediting is a sort of a secondary attempt to colonize countries around the world, where under the guise of saving environment they want to take control of natural resources of different countries.
That's right.
And few
Food.
African countries unfortunately have fallen prey to these sorts of policies, because of corruption, because of greed, and because of real serious lobbying which happens from the West. And it all happens under the label of climate change. Under the label of climate change, there is active colonization that is happening of African countries. Their resources are now under a lot of under the control of a lot of private companies in the US, who claim to be saving the environment for them because they are not capable of taking care of it themselves. Can you imagine the goal?
I mean, you hit the. I think we'll have to do 10 shows on just climate change actually, because you totally understand what the actual plan is to repossess the territories and freely under the name of the UN banner of climate change, and then control the resources, like what exactly happening in New Caledonia, what happened in Diego Garcia. We all know what happened in Diego Garcia. A lot of uranium deposits were stolen and taken back to UK and USA. So, do you think that the leader of the collective thinking of the West is UK?
Well, I don't think it's the UK anymore, especially because of the sort of hole they've dug themselves into. And I think the center has definitely shifted. It shifted from the UK to the US a while ago, and I think it's even shifted from the US now. And I do believe that it's shifted to power centers which are privately owned at this point. It has a lot of actors which are not just intergovernmental, but also like owners of large amounts of wealth, companies which um, control quarter of the world's wealth. I think it's key actors in these circles now where the power center lies. And unfortunately, I do believe that UK is something of the past at this point. Because I think every system, no matter how robust and how conniving and how evil, they all have their own sort of process of degradation and downfall. And I think the mighty British Empire, at least, is on the decline. And if not anything, their economy is itself an indication of how things are. And if you go to London now, then um, inflation is sky high, electricity is almost unaffordable. So there's a whole proverb which goes, you can either eat or heat. You can't afford both. Either you can afford your electricity bills, that's heat your building, or you can eat food. So you have to pick one. So it's come to that now. So I don't genuinely believe that the power center is there anymore, and that it's shifted more to other players, who key players who do have their origins in the West.
In early part of my career, my base was London because I was told by my corporate. I was very new salesman in IT services and IT products, CRM especially. And I was, when I first went to London, and when I saw the river Thames, I thought it was a big Nala, Indian Nala. It's like a big, grand Indian drainage system, canal. It's very small. And I was astonished that how, and I was based there, and many people in Britain know me very well because I used to go in Staines and many places over there, and I used to be wheeling and dealing with the who's and who of UK. And in that experience, what I found, there was an inherent disdain for the brown Hindu skin, not Muslim, not Christian, but Hindus especially. I especially observed that. But at that time, I was in my very young guy, out to conquer the world. And I noticed everything because I used everything that they said in my sales I pitches actually. So if they loved beer, I use beer for my sales activities. And I never drank it at that time. I was never drinking, and I was not part of any of those their habits. But still, I had that experience. So, do you think that there is an inherent look down syndrome of theirs against Hindus? Even though externally they may not say it, you said it very correctly. They camouflage very well.
Well, Aditya, I think there is a fundamental hatred of Abrahamics towards non-Abrahamics. The typical thing of non-indigenous towards the indigenous, of the non sort of Murti worshipping communities towards the Murti worshipping communities, because I refuse to call a Murti an idol. So I think that sort of disdain, that sort of hatred, and that sort of bigotry, if I may, is very deep seated, and it goes beyond sort of the niceties or political correctness or political leanings or even economy. I think this bigotry is deeply religious in nature. It's very sort of old and ancient in nature. And we really underplay the sort of origins of this because we are sort of led to believe that many of these institutions in the West now are agnostic or atheist or secular for that matter. But they're not. They're more religious than we can ever imagine, and very rigorous in that way, and very like puritanical in that way, that they do not tolerate anything other than what they believe in. um, I didn't know when I went to study at Oxford. I didn't know that Oxford was actually formally um, a collection of different, churches that came together to sort of impart religious education, and that even today every college has its own in-house church. So a small town of Oxford has 50 plus churches because every college has its own chapel. So education in itself has religious basis. The oldest school at Oxford is the Oxford Divinity School, and it still teaches that the earth is flat because it teaches religion from an Abrahamic sense. And nobody calls them intolerant or or sort of devolved, or a populace with a lot of prejudice or something like that, because they have more than 50% of the wealth that they unfairly hoarded to substantiate those claims. So nobody is going to call them out. But here, even if we claim that we knew that earth was spherical back in the day, and that we were more advanced in science and technology, and we were, as you say, we were based on Sattology and not on mythology, th- they just won't believe us and they'll make fun of us. So I just feel that this bigotry is deeper than we give it credit, and that it has religious basis, and it is something we are sort of attuned to underplaying because of how we've been educated over and over to assume that religion doesn't play a huge factor in the Western ecosystem, and that it's very sort of Bharatiya in nature, and that they're more secular and tolerant as compared to us, but it's the other way around. And that bigotry is so deep seated that it comes out as pure hatred, but it is masked as different things, as racism, as this, as that. But unfortunately, I think even we've resorted to using Western labels to categorize what's going wrong and why we are being treated so badly. I think it's way beyond racism. I think it has its basis in bigotry.
Totally right. Totally get it actually. And anyone who has lived in the West can feel it today. That Indian Americans, whatever they are, Vivek Ramaswamy was rejected because he's a Hindu. Period. The best candidate America ever got was rejected because he's a Hindu, and that's why he could not stand for presidential run. Vivek Ramaswamy may disagree with me, but that's a fact. And but this is America, the land of free. And free from who? Settlers declared independence against the Church of England. So they got their freedom from Church of England, King James. And later on, King James III actually made Commonwealth in USA. So Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, these are all Commonwealth states within the United States of America. Very few people know that. Now, okay, it's coming to the next point. And I have my brain is exploding with questions right now. And believe me, for the audience, I have not prepared any questions for her. So she's asking as I'm asking. She doesn't know what the next question is going to be. So
Yeah.
it's very natural conversation. So my next question is like these. So is USA a colony of Great Britain officially? Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and all these countries.
Well, you can't call it a colony anymore. I think it's just an extension of the United Kingdom because it's a settler colony, right? Most of them sort of when they settle, they increase. All of the white people that you see in America, in New Zealand, in Australia are all British. They all have European bases. They're either British, they're either French, German, from Netherlands. So they're not, they're not indigenous to America. So the poor indigenous people, in fact, are suffering even today because of what happened. So I don't think it's a colony anymore. I just feel like it's an extension
I
of the
want
empire.
I I want my viewers to go search Christy Noem, Governor of South Dakota, and how the tribal nations have refused her entry into the tribal nations, and that's a court case going on. So the US gave a promise to Native Americans that they will honor after pushing them in reservations, that they will not enter the reservations. And reservations are one of the worst territories people can push you in. It's like a jail, open jail, and still going on. So please do search it out. Yes, continue, please, Rashmi.
Yeah, so I mean, when it's a settler colony, all you've done is you've basically conquered, occupied. So I would like to call it a continuous occupation. The word colonization would be disservice to the sort of suffering and to the legacy of Native Americans, to the native sort of New Zealanders. There's this whole community right there, which is native to that land, and now they're
Maori,
actually fighting for rights. And
Maoris.
yeah, the Maori people, they're actually fighting for their rights and everything. And what what happened to the indigenous people in Australia? They were drugged. They were restricted to these. They were restricted to like closed jails, and they were declared as unstable and violent and whatnot. And what happened to them? I think, for that matter, India is really lucky that we don't have as many settler colonizers. Colonizers, so it didn't end up becoming a extended occupation. I think in that sense, even South Africa also had a lot more people staying back, but I think in Bharat, when they left, they all like really went away, and we were really independent. But everywhere else it was just occupation and an ultimate usurping and sort of changing of the entire demography, culture, food, and everything. And I think it's the most unfortunate thing. So you can't even call it colonization, you just have to call it an extended occupation.
Absolutely right. And what I think in the global south, if the any of the our supporters are listening and they can send you Jay Shankar, then the south, global south must include native indigenous communities of the world still occupied as an independent entity from each country, because that will really serve the purpose of giving them rights, giving them basic what do you call it, respect, because they're all looking for that. uh, my one of my next question comes in. You already mentioned in the beginning the student bodies
Mm-hmm.
in Oxford and in the Western universities, and you must have really seen that a Hindu organization is automatically registered by the students, but their funding is not there. Usually, funding is self-driven, but most of the other groups they get funding from other sources, from their churches and from the other places, and that's how the vibrancy is there. Even the Islamic groups that they're funding from many other sources, especially the Hindu bodies don't get funding. What do you have to say on that, or I'm wrong?
Well, Aditya, you're absolutely right. In fact, I think there are a bunch of student societies which are actually indirectly funded by their embassies, which is actually morally very wrong. But it does happen, and I've seen it happen. I've seen the Pakistani embassy like actively, indirectly fund a lot of student organizations to carry out their agenda and whatnot. And also through religious institutions, the sort of global chain of religious institutions, um, they also independently do fund these things, but unfortunately the Hindu students are left on their own. But I think it's very interesting that not all Hindu student organizations are what they claim to be. There are lots of, sort of Hindu organizations, just a name, which operate under the guise of a decoy to actually derail the entire Hindu movement. In fact, at Oxford, I encountered one such organization, which was supposed to be the Oxford Hindu Society, and it was very strange as it was not even, registered with the university. And it went on to claim that there's no Hindu phobia, that there's no Hindu hatred, and so on and so forth, whilst there was a faculty who was clearly hollering in writing that Oxford is not ready for a Hindu president. So there was actually proof in writing that the entire situation was very Hindu phobic, but they were defending this situation, leading to many questioning what really was going on. And I do believe that the sort of lack of appropriate funding has created space for a lot of decoy organizations funded by anti-India, anti-Hindu elements, which sort of fill up this space. So unfortunately, the lack of funding has created alternative channels, which then go on to set agendas which are very sort of counterproductive and very dangerous to the community and their goals.
So you hit the nail over there in terms of the university funding and other things. The one of the things which I see with the Hindu student associations as well as the other Hindu groups is, you correctly said that they have been infiltrated by many so-called Hindu named organizations, but they are actually not doing the work of for the Hindu cause. They won't discuss the Shastra, or they won't even talk about politics also. Keep away from politics, and try to follow the student groups in a pure sense of the way. But most of the groups are religious in nature. So when you look at the Western template for uh, teaching South Asian studies, and we all know in the name of South Asian studies that they are trying to negate Hindu culture, our and call it a mythology, which we strongly oppose. Purana and Mahabharat, Ramayana, in my books I've proved how real they are. And myself, I'm convinced. I don't have to need any other person to convince me. And the whole program is designed to show, like for example, Harvard Hindu Studies. The dean is Francis Clooney. I don't know whether he's still there or not. And Francis Clooney he wrote a translation of Ramanujacharya's work. 3 steps he wrote, and completely with an Abrahamic Christian mindset. He's in fact apologizing and trying to include the Hindu principles or Ramanujacharya's conversations into Christianity, almost doing that. And it's called inculturation in a very higher standard way. And the Indian universities want to validate themselves through Harvard. And we all know Harvard is a plagiarism based society, and they don't have anything on their own. So I can openly say that, and I can challenge them if they want to debate with us in any time. We are in San Diego, they are in wherever they are. So what do you think? What is the counter when the Indian universities actually perpetuate this nonsense, and also Indian corporates fund them? I have records of funding, and Rajiv Malhotra has done a wonderful work in his book Snakes in the Ganga, where he has actually documented the funding of each of the things that he has done. These guys have done. What is the answer to that? What is the solution?
Well, Aditya, I think firstly it's very important for everybody to understand how these sort of top 10, top 20 universities did become the top 10 universities. I can, give a small example about Oxford. So, Oxford is ranked number one in the world right now, according to the sort of Times survey and so on and so forth. The Henry, I think Henry the Fifth or Henry the Eighth, one of the Henrys, who's the King of England. Um, he was, I think, reigning around the time that Oxford was established and was a couple of 100 years old already. And at that time, the sort of education destination for everybody in Europe, including English people, was to go to this university in Paris. So that was the whole like thing. And everybody used to go to Paris to this one particular institution that I can't recall the name of. But then he had this rule. He created an active ban that English students cannot go abroad to study for almost 200, 300 years. It went on, the ban. And due to the ban, within 200, 300 years, the university was actually able to rise up to the standard that it did. And Aditya, don't you think if we had a ban only just for maybe two generations spanning say 25 years, 50 years, don't you think IITs would be the best universities in the world? We are losing our best minds, and that's the only reason why our universities are struggling in the ranking, in the global sort of ranking. So I think that's point A. We need to really, really understand what is the history of these universities and how they continue to sort of top these charts. And I think the how they continue to top these charts brings me to the second point as to the entire ranking process itself. It's rigged. So they make the rules and then they decide they're first. It's almost like you decide the rules for the game and then you decide to compete yourself. So there's a clear conflict of interest because you clearly know what the sort of judgment parameters are. You know the loopholes. You've had the time to study all of it, so you clearly know how to come first. So normally judges themselves do not participate in the competition, but here it's I'm the judge and I'm the competitor, so I'm going to be number one. I think that's the second sort of flaw with this ranking system that we have. um I think it's the two of these factors, the sort of inability of Indian institutions to really see these institutions for what they are, A, and B, the sort of, this accumulated colonial mindset that everything Western is superior, everything white is amazing, that then like sort of propels us to accept everything that they teach. My entire sort of plank for plank as a manifesto for my election at the University of Oxford was actually decolonization, because I knew that whatever syllabus is taught at Oxford is something that is parroted across the world. It's like a pyramid, you do one thing at the top and then it comes top down. So I thought the only way to stop it is to actually change the syllabus here. So my entire sort of shtick at the university, the manifesto was, okay, if I become president, then we are going to have a consultation that actually changes the entire syllabus, and that the biased sort of narrative of history is stopped, and that we actually learn history for what it is. And I felt that then only would there be like sort of a pyramid change. But I think I was too naive to think that winning an election and having this plank would be actually enough to bring the change, because what happened afterwards is that they knew that they had to bring me down, otherwise, I mean, these changes would happen. So yeah, I think it was just a combination of all of this. And that's what a Hindu in Oxford is all about, because it actively speaks about how really these sort of nexuses operate, how these syllabuses operate, and how unfortunately a small school in a small town in an interior part of Bharat is also impacted by the sort of misinformation and fallacy that these elite so-called institutions spread in the name of education, and how drastically it impacts the worldview of that little child learning in that small town, their sense of self-worth and what they decide to do with the rest of their lives. It's actually very heartbreaking.
Actually, very one interesting comment has come by Aman Singh Chauhan. It's a question to both of you whether whatever you people are talking, people read totally opposite to it when someone wants to qualify for UPSC. Classical thing which you just said, that you have to comply, and the problem is Indian universities actually, because if you are a university in a sovereign country, then you should be talking about your history, not others' history, and your version of the history, not others' history, because the British are going to tell you their version of the history, how they look at it. Very classical example is their prime minister, and which is very famous in India and abroad. But he's the hero. Winston Churchill is the hero, and for us, he's a villain.
Aditya, I think we shouldn't be surprised. Who set up the civil services in India? It was the British, to keep the Indians in line. And then we just have a continuation of that legacy, be it the courts, be it the legal system, be it the education, everything. We're just continuing the same thing. And we've, it's funny how we've sort of replaced our former white masters with brown sepoys to continue the sort of cycle of abuse and sort of injustice to our own people. It's absolutely funny. It's demented, but it's it's as sad as it's funny that we're so addicted to these systems, to being enslaved, that we continued the exact same systems even when our white masters left. And just because there was nobody to occupy those positions which the white masters occupied, we went on to produce brown sepoys. It's that bad. And I think you shouldn't be surprised about the UPSC, because who brought the civil services here? They did. And if it's not a continuation of what happened during the British era, in a slightly more sort of camouflaged and in a more sort of elite and in a more sort of a wishy-washy way, then what is it? It is the same thing. And I think it's a travesty that it's only now that we're beginning to understand and ask these questions, whilst we should have asked this the day we got independence.
Very rightly said. And for the viewers, and if she agrees, I'm going to get her to speak in Hindi also. And whenever
अरे
she
कर
agrees,
सकते हैं बात बिल्कुल
in
हिंदी
the
में.
next show, we'll bring her the same show in Hindi. But you just understand there are 200 million Indian diaspora and their children in all the continents of the world. They also would like to hear this because it's a first hand experience for them. If they speak English, they can understand this as well. But we'll do it in Hindi. For I love Hindi, I speak Marathi, so we can do it in local languages later on. You know? So, with that disclaimer, so don't get offended, anybody. So, stay there. Uh, so, when we talk about you highlighted the university rankings, and it's a self certificate. It's like I am certifying myself to be the best. It's a self certification by the Western universities. Now, the rankings also, you said that how the rankings are fudged to keep the morale of the British mindset up, because somehow the decolonization dialogue has reached the masses also in the West, that they were wrong, and that has resulted in white guilt in a significant way, and that has been exposed or misused by the Islamists also. But being a uh, like a balanced force, we don't want to get into the re-racism again. And as a Hindu, we can never be racist. It's impossible for us to be racist because our culture and DNA is like that. Impossible, because it's a culture of atma or soul. Now, my question to you is that when we, and I think most of the people don't realize, when we try to show them respect, does it increase their pride and hatred towards us or superiority complex, or it actually makes them think? What do you think? What do you say?
Well, I think it's very different. I think when we give them respect, we believe that they feel a sense of gratitude or a sense of acceptance for us. But what they feel when we give them respect but do not show us is a sense of, deep disgust, because they do not consider us um, to be worthy of even showing them respect, if I put it rightly. I hope I was able to like sort
You
of
put it rightly.
articulate
You put it
it.
rightly. You put it rightly.
They
Yes.
think that we do not have the, if I may put it in Hindi, that we don't have the aukat to be
True.
actually even paying respects to them. But they don't show this, but this is the inherent feeling. But what they feel, they make us feel, is accepted, welcome, and tolerated to a certain extent. And I think that's the sort of situation. They're extremely entitled, and the extent of entitlement is such that the inherent feeling is not one of gratitude but of disgust that their former colonies, sort of colonial citizens are now coming up to, even paying them respect or eating on the same table or sitting on the same table. So I think that still exists, and it's something we like to unsee because of the properness and because of the sort of facade and the camouflage that comes with, a lot of diction, a lot of poise, and a lot of like sort of this public facade.
So early 19th century Britain, London, and sorry, early 20th century London and late 19th century London was one of the most hellish places on the planet. So all the loot was transferred to the colonies and to the crown primarily, and the elitists actually were actually benefiting from it. So the British loot of the world actually did not help the common man in Wales, England, Scotland, any of these places. Do you think it's a right statement?
Well, Adityaji, I think it's comparative, right? When the aristocrats are actually making money, it also sort of, then there are services that are around what these aristocrats need, and then the overall standard of living does go up. When the rich get richer, even the others, get swept up in the wave. So I do believe that it's a sort of pyramid effect, and it's not a singular effect that one person gets rich and the rest of the society gets pulled back. But I think it's interesting to mention here that they actually sent all of their because the prisons were too full. It was the prisoners who were sent to the colonies, and the white people that we see now in many of the former colonies were actually are actually descendants of sort of lawbreakers in England. So I think that is an interesting analogy that most people don't know in today's state.
And that's
So
why they call it the freedom. I mean, the settlers, American
that
settlers'
is
freedom against
very
the Church of England. I mean, so the freedom and the democracy has totally different meaning in the West. Like in the
the
US in 1908, the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, Roman Catholic Church has very little influence on US, but is a Protestant church mostly. And they said now the European settlers are more in number than the native indigenous population. Now you can install democracy. That's a statement came out. Very open. In 1924, 2nd June, is when the American Constitution gave citizenship to Native Americans or American Indians. And the third thing is the word Indian, from where the word indigenous also comes, is a pejorative word in the UK lexicon. We all, if anyone studies etymology, you can study the roots of these words and how Indians were the backward, dehati bolte India mein. So they were the backward, not civilized, and all these things are happening, happen in the words. But now we also see a Britain which is absorbing yoga, which is again a farce, in the name of Christian yoga and separating yoga from Hindu. So how do you see all these things happening? Yes.
well, I think it's now that you brought up the word India, indigenous, I think it's a travesty that we refuse to be associated, a lot of us, with the word Bharat, which has such a beautiful meaning, Bhaya Ratamiti Bharatam, which is the people, the land of the people who seek light, the land of the people who seek wisdom. Such a beautiful meaning. Uh, to something that means backward, and just a nickname given to us by the Britishers. So it's, I think, travesty one. And the travesty two, actually, I didn't catch the question. You were saying, Adityaji?
Yes, the second part of the travel, it's a live show, so I don't remember my question when I say it. So I'm very honest about it. The audience knows me very well. So the second part was the travesty is that the most of the Indians don't understand the connotations of the word Indian in the British mindset lexicon. What do you
Correct.
say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's why they want to stick to the word India, and not to the word Bharat, which actually means Bhaya Ratamiti Bharatam. There's such a beautiful meaning. It means people, land of the people who seek light, which means land of the people who seek wisdom, constantly in pursuit of wisdom. Such a beautiful word, such a beautiful meaning. And rather, we like to stick to the word Indian, indigenous, Indian, India, something that was a nickname given by the British, which has such negative connotations. And I think it's a continuation of the sort of disdain that the West had towards us. And the biggest tragedy is that we continue to lap it up as something superior and as something wonderful, as compared to what it truly is.
Last point, I think we're going top of the hour, and we'll invite you again for the Hindi podcast so we can have the Hindi live show. So the media. Now, we all know Britons, they oppose BBC a lot because BBC is kind of wokeism, leftism. But I think the wokeism was first used by them against Hindus. So they should not be scared of wokeism because they are getting back their karma back. So they you did the cancel culture against Hindus before, now they're getting it back. And the Indian media is just doing the majority of the media, not all the Indian media, and some Indian media is really good. And where the Bharatiya media is actually perpetuating the propaganda of the English media. What do you say?
Well, I do believe that wokeism is like a snake, and the West tried to throw it in the neighbor's backyard. They tried to throw it in backyards of people they didn't like, and the snakes are not going to just stay in the place that they were put in. Of course, they're going to, creep up to your own backyard one day. And now that it has, they don't like it anymore. And I think it's very hypocritical of them to not like it. If you become a victim yourself of the problem you helped create, then you need to actually regret creating it in the first place, apologize to the world for the damage it's caused them, and stop this whole hypocritical show of actually opposing the very thing you helped create. And when it comes to, I think, the Indian media again peddling the British, the sort of Western propaganda, I think it all again depends, right, on who the people are, who do they answer to. Because I think I see India as currently a potpourri of people who have to a large extent realized their self-worth, their regain their self-respect and confidence, and people who are in the middle, in the process of regaining it, and another sort of batch who are still stuck in that entire mentality of um, you know s- of mental slavishness. And you can't blame them because it's a result of the sort of education system that we have now. I think this combination works. It should actually work one thirds, right, because there's one third of each sort of population, broadly speaking. But you see the people peddling the sort of superiority and the sort of Western superiority agenda more in prominence is because they have managed to, by legacy, hijack institutions. So if you've institutionalized your idea, then it becomes so much easier to propagate it and use it against, two-thirds of the people. So I do believe that, unfortunately, because they do have control of these institutions, it makes it harder to to shake it off. The fact that they have a heavy presence in the judiciary makes it very hard to prosecute people spreading misinformation and actually damaging information to this very country and its economy. In fact, I think you did follow, there was a very a misinformed report that actually affected the shares and the sort of prosperity of one of the companies which is actually actively helping in building Indian economy. And we couldn't do much about it because there's the judiciary. So then judiciary gives insurance to the sort of media houses which continue to spread these things. And then there's the global funding nexus, which continue to pump money. So I think the sort of institutionalization of this um, colonization in Bharat, and the sort of continuing of the same, the civil services. So the civil servants also form a great deal of a backbone of the Indian society and polity and the entire scenario. So when you have all of these people sitting in all of these decision making positions, then it becomes really really hard for the people who actually have a different opinion as to what this country is and where it's heading to make a lot of impact, irrespective of the efforts they put. So I think the problem is not in the number, but it's in the sort of position and the institutionalization which remains to be done.
Great point, actually, because we heard Sam Pitroda talking about Africans, like I'm an African now, and also other things. He spoke about nonsense.
Yeah, me too, actually, because I'm from Karnataka. I'm from like the southern tip of Karnataka, so that would make me 100% African.
Me too, Sholapur and Belgaum, sister cities. So me
Yes.
too, I become an African now. So and so this just shows the mindset of what is being taught to them. And Rahul Gandhi is also now a Chinese or something, or maybe what it is, I don't know.
No, he's the only Indian person. He and his mother are the only two Indians.
And also, and Prime Minister Modi also gave very good talk that the the constituencies belong to Janta, not to the family Italians. So,
Family,
so
yes. No, I think it was Mr. Amit Shah who said, yeah, because he was asked, because it's his mother's constituency. So he was like, what are you saying? No constituency belongs to a mother, a father, or a child. It belongs to the people and their children.
exactly. Thank you so much, Rashmi, for coming on the show today. And I would like to invite you for a Hindi podcast most of the viewers are asking for. And then we'll cover more in detail, similar topics, but more. But especially for people who are studying in the West and who are trying to send their children to the West, I will say that the jobs are very getting very scarce in North America and other places. So don't have to come there. And I think in next 5 years, 6 years, the pivot is going to happen. And I really want the British to vacate all the occupied territories. I really want them to do that. And it won't happen easily because British have to be forced out everywhere. So I support all the indigenous movements. Sattology supports them, native communities. We support all those people whose human rights have been abused by the champions of human rights in the West. So Rashmi, would like to say anything? Concluding words?
No, nothing really. And I'm super glad to be part of this podcast. And I'm looking forward to be back for a pure Hindi podcast and break the mythology that this Hindi imposition in the South and that South Indians can't speak in Hindi. So we can break that mythology in the next podcast.
Thank you so much. And thank you all the viewers for watching. And I'll see you in the next show. Namaste. Jai Jagannath.
Namaste. Namaste.